Who just shot the Palestinian Hotel?
Tomlinson hears how DeCamp, clearly upset, asks Walford,
Did you just shoot the Palestinian Hotel?
The question, and the way he asked the question was a little misleading. When he asked Captain Walford, did you shoot the Palestine Hotel, he assumed knowledge that Captain Walford didn't have.
I wish it would have never happened, but it has happened. And I prayed about it and I asked God for his forgiveness. And my sincere apologies and grievances to their families. It was not done intentionally.
There was the sense throughout the chain of command, from Perkins to DeCamp to Walford, all the way down to Sergeant Gibson, that they had done something very bad. That they, I can tell you that Captain Walford was visibly upset when I saw him 2 hours later. He was very upset about it. Sergeant Gibson is very upset about it. Colonel DeCamp obviously was very angry. He was upset.
Spanish journalists are not as understanding as Tomlinson about the military officer's behavior. The 3 attacks on journalists on April 8th lead them to think that U.S. forces did not want witnesses.
What's my opinion? My opinion is that there was a deliberate intent to fire on the journalist's hotel.
So they had to know perfectly well where we were, and there was no mistake. There could be no mistake.
First, they get rid of the offices of Al Jazeera TV. Half an hour later, they shoot at the offices of Abu Dhabi TV. And half an hour after that, the same tank, why not, shoots at the hotel where other international journalists are staying.
I don't know to what extent. The Americans knew that the final stages of the war would be so easy for them.
And what they did not want, under any circumstances, was almost 300 journalists, non-American, and not under their control, that is, who would not exercise patriotic self-censorship, ready to cover whatever might happen.
That an excerpt of the Telecinco documentary on the killing of the 2 journalists at the Palestine Hotel, April 8th, 2003. Jose Couso worked for Telecinco. Adrienne Kinne is joining us on the phone right now from Vermont. We lost the satellite signal. The former Army Sergeant who worked in military intelligence, served 10 years from '94 to 2004, was an Arab translator, and says that she received an email, a list of targets she had. What kind of security clearance did you have, Adrienne Kinne?
I actually had a top secret SCI clearance.
And as we listen to this, the confusion on the ground, supposedly the soldiers who've now been indicted in a Spanish court say, the question was why they weren't told from their higher-ups immediately what the Palestine Hotel was, who was in the Palestine Hotel. And you contend that the list came, you saw this list before April 8th, 2003, before it was attacked.
Yeah, I can't be 100% positive as far as the timeline, but to the best of my memory, it was in the build-up and before shock and awe. So I believe that if it had been after the attack had already taken place, it would have been very much a moot point.
And you say you were listening to conversations of journalists in the Palestine Hotel before, explicitly saying they felt they were safe, reassuring loved ones they were having conversations with. And this was on just satellite phone technology?
Yeah, that's what our mission was post 9/11, was intercepting satellite phone communications to include any email and faxes that were transmitted over satellite phone connections.
I also, Adrienne Kinne, wanted to go back to this point of eavesdropping on international aid organizations, on NGOs. Can you explicitly say what you heard and why you were listening to these conversations?
Definitely. During that one conversation between the British aid worker and the American aid worker that I was talking about previously, the British aid worker basically told the American, be careful what you say because the Americans are listening to us. And they weren't talking about anything that would have warranted their concern. It was just kind of mundane office goings on. And so the American actually responded and said, they can't listen to me. I'm an American citizen. I'm protected by UCIT 18. And USID 18 is basically a directive which is given out to military intelligence, which bars the collection on American citizens to include allies of other countries who we've signed binding agreements with. And when I heard that transmission and that conversation, it caused me to raise my eyebrow, because here we were listening to Americans and we were collecting on them. And so I brought that particular intercept to the attention of my officer in charge. And actually, rather than be concerned that we were actually spying on Americans and violating the law and the Constitution, he was actually outraged that an American would reference USID 18 to a non-American, and as if this American was somehow betraying some classified information that Americans have a right not to be spied upon. And it was shortly thereafter that we were given a verbal waiver that we could listen to Americans and other citizens of ally countries from whatever organization, humanitarian aid organizations, journalists, NGOs, because and then we were given two reasons that we could listen to Americans and these ally citizens. One was that they were eyes on the ground, and they could stumble upon the location of weapons of mass destruction, and if they should pass the location on over the phone to coworkers or what have you, that we would have to be listening in order to find out where the weapons of mass destruction were located, and we could pass that location on to higher-ups. The other rationale that we're given in order to kind of justify spying on Americans was that the organization or the individual could lose their satellite phone, and a terrorist could pick it up and then start using it. And we would have to monitor all of these phones in order to make sure that if that took place, we could be there to listen to the terrorists. And you know, when this was going on, I had absolutely no idea what was going on in the rest of the military intelligence, the rest of our government. Everything is so compartmentalized that you don't really know necessarily what the person next to you is doing, let alone in a different room, in a different building, in a different location. And so it really wasn't until the New York Times piece came out about the NSA's domestic wiretapping that I really began to think about what we were doing in my mission, and that we were collecting on Americans. And we were doing so for the flimsiest of reasons. After watching the documentary recently called No One in Sight, in that documentary, there were actually people on the ground in Iraq who would come across the location of weapons caches, and they would call our military and report their location, thinking that it might be a good idea to secure those weapons caches. And our military just did not have the capability to go out to all of these locations. So there were people on the ground who were trying to tell our military where these weapons were, and we couldn't really necessarily do anything about it. So why that excuse was used to justify listening to these people in their satellite phone conversations, I just have a hard time understanding anymore.
Adrienne Kinne, who gave the verbal waiver that you were to listen in?
Pretty much everything that I was ever directed or told came from my warrant officer, John Barry, who was our officer in charge for the duration of our mobilization.
Did you know it was illegal?
I definitely knew that that was something that military intelligence was not supposed to do, and I had never done that in the previous, by then I think I'd been in the military for about 6.5 years, and I was on active duty for 4. And that was something we took incredibly seriously. But people took 9/11 and the fear of terrorism to such extremes. My warrant officer actually said in the build-up to shock and awe that this was basically final retribution for 9/11, and then we were going to bomb those barbarians back to Kingdom Come. And this is the kind of guidance that was coming from our highest person in charge. And talk about the racism and dehumanization that is just rampant in our military. It affects everybody everywhere, not just on the ground in Iraq or Afghanistan, but even working in an office building in the United States of America. And people took this fear and the fear of the unknown, and believing the administration when they said that Iraq was tied to 9/11, they basically used that to justify doing a lot of things that we should not have been doing.
Adrienne Kinne, what exactly, if you might go back and talk about what you heard of the NGOs talking to each other explicitly that you were listening to, which NGOs were you listening to?
I really only remember bits and pieces, different names. I remember seeing, because we would have a queue where all of the, basically on our computer screen, where all of the conversations would pop up, and it would have the number, the time of the cut, and the name of the organization if we had identified who the phone number belonged to. A lot of our conversations were left unidentified because we just did not have the people, manpower needed to get through everything. And I think that that's one of the reasons why it's just so unfortunate that our government has